Well, hello there, and welcome back to my channel. It is I, nakiuyomushi, your brother from another mother, your sister from another mister, your person from another... I don't freaking know. Today is a follower appreciation video, especially because of how my channel has been growing, and one of my dear loving followers' birthday is April 22nd. Today, or maybe yesterday, depending on when I can get this video posted. This follower supports every single one of my posts by commenting and liking, and they are amazing, much like all of you that are here along with me on this journey. This particular follower requested that I draw stray kids from their SKZ Code Chuseok Special, and I thought since that particular special is all about their, quote, family dynamics, I would read one of my favorite short stories by Osamu Dazai. The short story is called On Love and Beauty, Ai to Bi ni Tsuite, and was written in May 1939. I will be reading the translation by Ralph F. McCarthy from the book Blue Bamboo Tales by Dazai Osamu. This short story is about a family and what they do on a rainy afternoon. I find it particularly endearing and entertaining, much like the Stray Kids episode that this drawing is based off of. So without further ado, let's read and draw! There were 5 brothers and sisters, and all of them loved romances. The eldest son was 28 and a Bachelor of Laws. He tended to come across as arrogant and standoffish, but this was only a forbidding mask to disguise his own vulnerability. He was, in fact, a fragile and very gentle person. Even as he complained, whenever the brothers and sisters went to the movies, that the samurai film they were watching was rubbish or silly, he was always the first to burst into tears, overwhelmed by the main character's inner conflict between duty and heart. Always. On emerging from the movie theater, however, he'd be wearing a petulant sort of scowl, and all the way home he'd refuse to utter a single word. He often professed without the least hesitation that he'd never told a lie in his life. Doubtful as that may be, it is true that he had a certain virtuous, irreproachable side to his character. His marks in school had not been very good, and after graduation he hadn't sought employment, but had devoted himself instead to looking after the family. He was currently involved in research on Ibsen. Recently, upon rereading A Doll's House, he had made a major discovery and worked himself into quite a lather. Nora was in love. She was in love with the Dr. Rank. That was his discovery. He called the brothers and sisters together, pointed out the relevant passage, and attempted to explain it to them in a commanding bellow, but all in vain. Far from sharing his excitement, the brothers and sisters merely cocked their heads, grinning and murmuring, or I wonder. They were not inclined to take their eldest brother very seriously, and at times even seemed to regard him as somewhat comical. The elder daughter, who was 25 and still unwed, worked at the railways ministry. She boasted a rather good command of French. She was tall and very thin with a long, narrow face, and her younger siblings sometimes referred to her as the horse. Her hair was cut short and she wore round glasses with black frames. Warm and gregarious by nature, she made friends easily and became thoroughly attached to them, only to be abandoned in due course. This was in fact her hobby. Secretly, she took pleasure in the heartache and melancholy such rejections afforded her. Once, however, when she fell hard for a young officer in her department and was, as usual, cast aside, her devastation was quite real. And because the situation at work was as awkward as it was disheartening, she thought it best to plead lung problems. After lying in bed for a week with bandages wrapped around her neck, coughing like mad, she was finally taken to see a specialist, who studied her x-rays and congratulated her on having as healthy a set of lungs as he'd ever seen. Her real love, in any case, was literature. She read a tremendous amount, and her tastes knew no historical or geographical bounds. She was also stealthily writing something of her own, a treasure that she kept hidden in the right-hand drawer of her bookcase. Placed neatly atop the manuscript was a note that read, "To be made public 2 years after my death." The 2 years was amended occasionally to read 10 years, or 2 months, or even at times 100 years. The second son was 23. He was a snob. Though enrolled in medical school at the Imperial University, he rarely attended classes, being frail of constitution and frequently ill. He had a face that was almost startlingly lovely, and he was a miser. When the eldest son proudly brought home a ridiculous, worn-out old tennis racket that had supposedly been used by Montaigne, and that he bragged of having purchased after much haggling for 50 yen, the second son, overwhelmed by the attempt to conceal his righteous indignation, came down with a bad fever that eventually did damage to his kidneys. He had a tendency to look down on others. Whenever someone ventured an opinion on any topic, he would respond with a scornful, uncanny laugh, a grating cackle like the call of some sort of goblin crow. His one and only idol was Goethe, although there was something suspicious about his admiration for the man. He seemed to respect the master not so much for his pure poetic spirit as for the lofty social status he enjoyed. But the fact remains that whenever the brothers and sisters held competitions in impromptu verse, the second son always came out on top. He was a natural poet. Precisely because he was such a snob. He had a well-defined objective grasp of human passion, and if he'd put his mind to it, he might have even become an acclaimed writer. A slightly lame 16-year-old maid who worked for the family was hopelessly in love with him. The younger daughter was 20. She was a narcissist. When a certain newspaper held a campaign to find Miss Japan, she was so tormented by the question of whether or not to nominate herself that she tossed and turned in bed for 3 consecutive nights, suppressing an urge to scream and tear at her hair. She found relief only when it came to her attention that she was too short to qualify for the competition anyway, and promptly erased the whole thing from her mind. Of all the brothers and sisters, she alone was extraordinarily petite, standing only 4 feet 7 inches tall, but by no means was she unattractive. She was, in fact, quite an eyeful. Late at night, she would sit in front of a mirror in the nude, practicing coy smiles and spreading lotion on her shapely white legs, then softly kissing her fingertips and closing her eyes as if enraptured. Once, when a pimple the size of a pinprick appeared on the tip of her nose, she grew so depressed that she almost committed suicide. There was a distinctive character to the younger daughter's choice of reading material. She would go to used bookstores to search out such works of the early Meiji era, such as Chance Encounters with Beautiful Women and Inspirational Tales of Leadership. These she would bring home and pore over, chuckling to herself as she read. She enjoyed contemporary foreign works in translation, and she also managed somehow to accumulate a great number of obscure little cotier magazines, which she would read from cover to cover, muttering, "How amusing," or "Clever, very clever." But her favorite, though she kept this to herself, was the great romantic Izumi Kyoka. The youngest son was 17. He had just matriculated at Tokyo First Higher School, where he was enrolled in the science department. Upon entering higher school, his personality had undergone a sudden transformation. This was a source of great hilarity for the elder brothers and sisters, but the youngest son took his newfound sophistication quite seriously indeed. When a minor dispute of any sort arose in the household, he would inevitably stick his nose into the matter and, though no one was asking him to, pronounce his carefully considered judgment. The entire family was appalled by this and tended to give him a wide berth these days. But the elder daughter, who could not bear to see him sulking and pouting, had written a poem to console him in his lonely exile. Ah, the sadness of having become a grown-up, mature in every way, and being the only one who knows it. His face resembled that of a bear cub, and the elder brothers and sisters, in fact, found him adorable and had always tended to pamper him. As a result of this treatment, he was a bit scatterbrained. He loved detective stories and from time to time, alone in his room, experimented with disguises. He'd recently bought a dual-language edition of Conan Doyle stories, purportedly for the purpose of studying English, but in fact, he was reading only the Japanese translation. He quietly suffered the tragic conviction that of all the brothers and sisters, he alone worried about their mother sufficiently. The father had died some 5 years before, but there was no threat to their standard of living, which is to say that they were a family of some substance. Occasionally, they were all overcome with a suffocating sense of boredom, and such was the case on this particular day. It was a dark and cloudy Sunday. Summer was on its way, but first, the gloomy, rainy season must be endured. They had all gathered in the drawing room where the mother was dispensing apple juice to her 5 children. The youngest son's cup was considerably larger than everyone else's. It was customary in this household for the brothers and sisters to relieve bouts of boredom by taking turns spinning out a collective story. The mother, too, sometimes joined in. "Any ideas?" The eldest son swept a pompous gaze over the assemblage. "I'd like today's protagonist to be a bit eccentric, perhaps." "Let's make him an elderly man." The younger daughter struck a hopelessly affected pose. Elbow on table, chin on palm, forefinger raised to rest against the cheek. "I gave this a lot of thought last night." It had in fact just occurred to her at that moment. "And I realized that elderly men comprise the most romantic category of human beings. An old woman won't do it all. It has to be a man. An elderly man can be merely sitting on a veranda, and that's all it takes. It's already romantic. An old man, eh?" The eldest son pretended to think it over for a moment. "All right, so be it. Let's make it a nice story, though, full of sweetness and light. The return of Gulliver last time was a bit too dark. I mean, I've been rereading Brand recently, and I have to admit it makes my shoulders stiff. It's just too harrowing." A rare confession. "I'll go first!" The youngest son nominated himself in a shrill voice without bothering to pause and arrange his thoughts. He gulped down his apple juice, and then slowly and deliberately he began setting forth his ideas. Allow me to explain how I see it." The other smiled ruefully at his attempt to sound mature, and the second son produced his famous jeering cackle, but the youngest forged ahead. "I think this elderly gentleman must be a great mathematician. Yes, I'm sure of it. A great and renowned mathematician, a doctor of mathematics, naturally, and a world-class scholar. Mathematics is changing drastically these days, as I'm sure you're all well aware. It's going through a transitional period. This has been underway for the past 10 years or so, since about 1920, to be more precise, or just after the end of the World War." It was painfully obvious that he was parroting word for word a lecture he'd attended at school the day before. If one looks back on the history of mathematics, one can see how the science has evolved in concert with the times. The first stage in this process came with the discovery of differential and integral calculus. That spawned what in broad terms we might call modern mathematics, as opposed to the traditional Greek variety. New territory had been opened, and directly afterward we had a period of, not refinement, strictly speaking, but expansion. That was the mathematics of the 18th century. As we move into the 19th century, we find, sure enough, another rash of new ideas. And this, too, was a time of sudden change. To choose one representative figure, we might mention Gauss, for example. That's Gauss. But if we define a transitional period as a time during which continual rapid change takes place, then the present is indeed a transitional period to end all transitional periods. This was of no use whatsoever, least of all as a story. The youngest son was nonetheless positively triumphant, convinced that he was beginning to hit his stride. Things have become extremely complicated. We are now awash in a deluge of theorems, and mathematics as we know it has reached a dead end. It has been reduced to a science of mere rote memorization, and the one man who at this crucial juncture has dared to stand up and proclaim freedom for mathematics is none other than our elderly professor. He's a great man. Had he become a detective, he undoubtedly would have solved even the most difficult and bizarre case after nothing more than a quick stroll through the scene of the crime. That's how brilliant he is. At any rate, as Cantor himself has put it, here we go again. Freedom is the very essence of mathematics. This is certainly true. Our word freedom, Jiuse, was coined as a translation of the German Freiheit, but it's said that the Japanese word was originally used in a strictly political sense and may not be an exact equivalent. Freiheit is a simple concept that means not enslaved, not subject to restraint. Examples of things that are not frei are to be found in any number of familiar places. So many, in fact, that it's difficult to choose a single illustration. But take our telephone number, for example, which, as you all know, is 4823. How do we write it? With a comma between the first and second integers. 4,823. Now, if we were to write it with a slash, as they do in Paris, 48/23, one could see the logic. But this custom of separating each group of 3 digits with a comma is nothing less than a form of slavery! Our elderly professor is making every effort to smash such corrupt conventions. He is a great man. Poincaré tells us that the only thing worthy of our love is truth, and I heartily agree. To grasp the truth in a concise and direct manner is the highest of human endeavors. There is nothing superior to it. So what about the story? The other brothers and sisters were now exchanging disconcerted looks, but the youngest son remained oblivious to them as he plowed ahead with his wobbly thesis. To enter the realm of empty academic theory is to run the risk of digressing from the point. But if I might ask you to bear with me for a moment, it so happens that I am currently engaged in the study of mathematical analysis, and since it is rather fresh in my mind, I should like to express a certain problem inherent in this field as an example of what I'm trying to say. These days, it has been customary for treatments of mathematical analysis to begin with a discussion of the theory of sets, a questionable tendency in and of itself. Tradition, as it would seem, can inspire in people an almost religious faith, and this sort of blind dogmatism has even begun to infiltrate the world of mathematics. It must be driven out at all costs! And that is precisely what our elderly professor has taken it upon himself to do. To rise to the battle against tradition! The youngest son was growing noticeably excited. Everyone else was bored to tears. But he had roused himself to a righteous fervor worthy of his elderly professor. Let's examine the case of absolute convergence. In the past, absolute convergence meant that a sum was conditionally constant irrespective of order or sequence, the operative word being conditionally. What it means nowadays, on the other hand, is simply that progression of absolute value must converge. It's said that if progression series converge and progression series of absolute value do not converge, one can change the order of the terms to make them tend to an arbitrary limit. So it turns out that they converge anyway, so it's all right. Suddenly he was losing his grip on the subject. He felt terribly alone. He thought of the textbook by Professor Tagaki sitting on the desk in his room, but he could hardly stop here and go get it. Everything was explained clearly in the book. He was on the verge of tears. His voice faltered, his breast trembling, and in a tone so shrill it resembled a shriek, he said, "In short!" The brothers and sisters all sat with bowed heads, giggling to themselves. "In short," he said again, suppressing a sob, "the problem with tradition is that it can cause even an error of great magnitude to go unnoticed. But there are a lot of problematic little details involved that we don't have time to get into here. In any case, I would like to express my fervent wish for the publication of an introduction to mathematical analysis that has a freer point of view and is more accessible to the layman." And here the youngest son's part of the story ended. What a mess. A chill had even fallen over the room. There was simply no way to continue the story. Nothing to graft onto. Everyone seemed lost in morbid contemplation. The eldest daughter, however, being the compassionate person she was, wanted to come to her youngest sibling's aid. She stifled a final giggle, composed herself, and began to speak in a quiet voice. As the preceding discussion has amply demonstrated, our elderly professor is a man of lofty character. A lofty character is always shadowed by adversity. This is a rule with no exceptions. The old professor doesn't fit in. Forever regarded as strange or eccentric by his neighbors, he can't help but feel miserably lonely at times. And on this particular night, he is, as usual, alone as he picks up his walking stick and heads for Shinjuku. Our story takes place in summer. Great crowds of people throng the streets of Shinjuku. The professor presents a heart-trending sight in his old wrinkled cotton yukata, with the sash tied high above his waist and the loose ends dangling down almost to his heels like the tail of a rat. What makes things worse is that although the professor is a man who perspires a great deal, he has forgotten his handkerchief. At first he wipes his brow with the palm of his hand, but this method proves no match for such a prodigious amount of sweat. It gushes from his forehead like water overflowing a mountain pool, streaming down his nose and temples, washing over the entire surface of his face, dripping from his chin to his chest, and he feels perfectly wretched, as if he's had a jug of sticky camellia oil dumped over his head. He finally begins to use the sleeves of his yukata, swiftly passing one sleeve over his face, walking a few steps, then surreptitiously doing the same with the other sleeve, and before long, both sleeves are drenched. The professor is by nature indifferent to appearances, but this flood of perspiration is just too much for him, and at last he decides to take refuge in a beer hall. Inside, the air being pushed around by the fans is warm and damp, but at least his perspiration subsides somewhat. The radio in the beer hall is blaring a lecture on current affairs, and suddenly the professor takes notice of the voice delivering the lecture. It's a voice he's heard before. "It sounds like that weasel," he thinks, and sure enough, when the lecture ends, the announcer comes on to pronounce the name of that weasel, attaching the honorific title, His Excellency. The professor wishes he could wash out his ears. The weasel is a man who studied alongside the professor throughout higher school and university, a calculating schemer who climbed to a lofty position in the Ministry of Education. Now and then, the professor and the weasel have occasion to come face to face at class reunions or academic conferences, and each time they meet, the weasel heaps gratuitous derision upon him. He delivers a series of boorish, banal jabs, and although nothing he says is the least bit funny, the members of his entourage laugh uproariously at every word, all but slapping their knees. On one such occasion, the professor kicked his chair back and rose to his feet in a rage, but unfortunately stepped on an orange he dropped earlier, squishing it and allowing a startled, feeble shriek to escape his lips. "Eek!" he cried, at which the entire company exploded with laughter. Thus the professor's righteous anger edited a sad and pitiable farce. But he is not about to give up. He's determined to punch that weasel on the nose one day. Hearing this loathsome, grating voice on the radio has put the professor in a most unpleasant mood, and he gulps down a beer. Never having been one to hold his liquor very well, he grows tipsy almost at once. A young girl selling fortunes enters the beer hall. The professor calls her over in a soft, familiar tone of voice, says, "How old are you, dear? 13? You don't say. That means that in another 5 years, no, 4 years. No, in another 3 years, you can get married. Now, listen carefully. How much is 13 plus 3?
And so on. Even a respected professor of mathematics can behave rather inappropriately when drunk. Now, however, having been somewhat overly persistent in teasing the girl, he realizes he has little choice but to buy one of her fortunes. The professor is not a superstitious man, but tonight, partially because of the radio broadcast, he feels somewhat vulnerable and has a sudden urge to consult the fortune as to what will become of his research and where his destiny will lead him. When one's life begins to unravel, one is tempted, sadly enough, to cling to the thread of prophecy. The fortune is of the invisible ink variety. The professor heats the paper with the flame of a match, opening his bleary eyes wide in an attempt to focus on the words as they appear. At first, he's uncertain what he's seeing. It merely looks like some sort of design, but gradually the lines resolve into clear-cut characters written in a flowing, old-fashioned style. Just as you wish. Seeing this, the professor beams. Well, no, beams is hardly the word. Our noble professor erupts with a vulgar-sounding chuckle. Then thrusts out his chin and looks about at the other drunken customers. None of them take any particular notice of the professor, but that doesn't stop him from nodding to each of them and producing a series of silly laughs. Ha! Ha! Just as you wish! He, he! Excuse me! Ho, ho, ho! As he strolls serenely out of the beer hall, his self-confidence thoroughly restored. Outside, a slow-moving river of people flows over the street. It's a quiet crush. People jostling and shoving, all of them dripping with sweat, but trying to look composed and indifferent as they shuffle along. They're walking with no goal or destination in mind, to be sure. But precisely because their daily lives are so dreary, they are harboring, all of them, some faint flicker of hope that compels them to stroll through the Shinjuku night with looks of cool composure on their faces. Walk up and down these streets all you like, not a single good thing will come of it. This much is certain. But happiness is being able to hope, however faintly, for happiness. So, at least, we must believe if we are to live in the world of today. Discharged from the beer hall's revolving door, the professor totters and dives into the city's sad current of migrant souls, and is at once jostled and swept downstream, floundering and flailing as if he were drowning. Tonight, however, of all the members of this vast throng, the professor is quite possibly the one with the greatest confidence. The odds of his obtaining happiness are better than anyone else's. Recalling his good fortune from time to time as he walks along, he smiles or nods to himself, or raises his eyebrows to give his expression a grave and dignified aspect, or makes inept and rather uncouth attempts at whistling. Then suddenly, he collides head-on with a young student. This, however, is only to be expected. In a crowd this size, it's natural that one will bump into someone else occasionally. Nothing comes of this encounter. The student merely walks on. But a short while later, the professor collides with a beautiful young lady. Nothing comes of this either, though. She merely continues along the street. It is not yet time for happiness to arrive. The new development is to come from behind him. Someone taps the professor lightly on the back. This time, it's no accident. The elder daughter stopped there. She'd been speaking all this time with downcast eyes. Now she snatched off her glasses and began vigorously polishing the lenses with her handkerchief, something she always did when self-conscious. The second son continued. I'm afraid I'm not very good at doing descriptive passages, or rather, it's not that I'm not good at it, it's just that it seems like too much trouble today. So I'll keep this brief and to the point. Such cheek. The professor turns to see a plump woman of about 40. She's holding a small dog with a remarkably ugly face. The two of them have the following conversation. Happy? She says. Sure, I'm happy. Since you've been gone, everything's fine. Everything's well, just as I wish. Humph! I suppose you've got yourself some young thing. Something wrong with that? Yes, there is something wrong with that. Didn't you promise me that if I only gave up dogs, I could return to you at any time I pleased? That's not likely to happen, though, is it? God, this one's a real horror. Just horrible. It looks like a creature that eats larvae or something. What a monstrosity. Ugh, it's nauseating. You don't have to go all pale in the face for my benefit. Isn't that right, Pro? Is the bad man making fun of you? Bark at him. Go on. Woof woof. Stop that. You're as contrary as ever, aren't you? You know, just talking to you sends chills down my spine. Pro? What the hell is that? Can't you come up with a name with a bit more class, idiot? What's wrong with Pro? It's short for Professor. I named him in honor of you. Isn't he sweet? I can't stand this. My, you still perspire as much as ever, don't you? Goodness, don't wipe it with your sleeve. How do you think that looks? Don't you have a handkerchief? Your new wife must be an awfully careless person. I never once forgot to see that you had 3 handkerchiefs and a fan whenever you went out in summer. I won't have you finding fault with my hallowed home. It's most unpleasant. Well, excuse me. Here, take this handkerchief. Thanks. I'll just borrow it for the time being. You've become a complete stranger, haven't you? When 2 people separate, they become strangers. That's just the way it... Wait, this handkerchief. Sure enough, it has the same old... No, it smells of dogs! What a thing to say! The fragrance brings back memories, doesn't it? Don't be stupid. You know what your problem is? Ill breeding. Me? What about yourself? Do you insist on your new wife babying you too? You mustn't, you know, at your age. How do you think it looks? She'll grow to hate you. Having her put your socks on you while you're still in bed and... I told you, I won't have you finding fault with my hallowed home. Listen, I'm happy now. Everything's going splendidly. And do you still have soup in the morning? With 1 raw egg? Or 2? 2, sometimes 3. I have more of everything now than I did with you. I'll tell you, when I look back, I get the feeling there can't be many women in this world with a tongue as sharp as yours. Why did you have to yell at me so much? I felt like an unwanted guest in my own home, dining ill and supping worse. I haven't forgotten that. I was working on some very important research in those days, you know. You didn't understand that at all. Nagging me from morning to night about the buttons on my vest or my cigarette butts. Thanks to you, my research and everything else in my life was a shambles. As soon as I split up with you, I ripped every button off my vest and started throwing all my cigarette butts into coffee cups. That was a wonderful feeling. Absolutely exhilarating. I laughed so hard all by myself that tears came to my eyes. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how I'd suffered at your hands. Afterwards, I just grew angrier and angrier. Even now, I'm plenty angry. You don't have any idea how to treat a person. I'm sorry. I was young. Forgive me. Now I understand. The dogs were never really the problem, were they? There you go, wringing out the tears again. That always was your way. Well, it won't work anymore. Right now, for me, everything is just as I wish. See? You want to have a cup of tea somewhere? I can't. Now I understand perfectly. You and I have become strangers, haven't we? No, we always were strangers. Our hearts were in different worlds, 1,000 miles, 1,000,000 miles apart. If we were together, we'd only be miserable, both of us. I want to make a clean break with you now. You see, I'm going to have a hollowed home of my own soon.
Oh, you found a good prospect?
I'll be fine. He works in a factory. He's the foreman. I understand that if it weren't for him, the machines in the factory wouldn't run at all. He's a big man, a mountain of a man, solid as a rock.
Not like me, eh?
No, he's not a scholar. He doesn't do research or anything, but he's awfully good at what he does.
I'm sure you'll be happy. Goodbye, then. I'll just borrow this handkerchief for now.
Goodbye! Your sash is coming undone. Here, I'll tie it for you. Really, there's no end to looking after you, is there? Give my regards to your wife.
Sure, if I think of it. The second brother fell silent, then let out a self-deprecating cackle. If his observations seemed strangely sophisticated for one of his youth, this was nothing new.
I already know how it ends, the younger daughter smugly continued. Here's what happens. I'm quite sure. After the professor parts with the woman, there's a sudden downpour. No wonder it's been so humid. The people walking the streets scatter in every direction, like a batch of newborn spiders. It's like magic the way they disappear. And the streets of Shinjuku, which were so crowded only moments before, are now silent and empty of everything but rain splattering in silver explosions on the pavement. The professor takes refuge under the eaves of a flower shop, hunching his shoulders and shrinking into a grouch. From time to time, he pulls out the handkerchief and gazes at it for a moment, then hastily stuffs it back into his sleeve. It occurs to him to buy some flowers. If he does that and brings them back to his wife, who's waiting at home, she's sure to be delighted. Never before in the professor's life has he purchased flowers. He's not quite himself today. The radio, the fortune, the ex-wife, the handkerchief, a lot has transpired. Coming to a momentous resolve, he dashes into the flower shop, and though he's terribly flustered and embarrassed and sweating profusely, somehow summons the courage to buy 3 large, long-stemmed roses. He's shocked at how expensive they are. Outside the flower shop, he grabs a taxi and heads straight for home. The lantern glows brightly over the front door of his house on the outskirts of town. Home, sweet home. A refuge of warmth and comfort. The one place where everything goes splendidly. As he opens the door, he calls out in a loud voice, "I'm home!" He's in high spirits. It's silent inside, but that doesn't stop him. Bearing the flowers like a torch, he marches through the house and enters his study.
I'm home! Got caught in the rain! What an ordeal! How do you like these? I'm told everything will turn out just as I wish!
He's speaking to a photograph that sits atop his desk. It's a photo of the woman with whom he just made a clean break. But no, not as she is now. It's a photo taken a decade ago. She wears a beautiful smile.
Narcissus struck her affected pose again. Chin on hand, forefinger against cheek, and gazed about the room as if to say,
nothing to it.
Yes, well, the eldest son began in a pedantic air. I suppose that more or less wraps things up. However, as the eldest, he had his dignity to maintain. Compared to the other brothers and sisters, he had not been blessed with a very rich imagination and was incompetent at telling stories. He simply lacked talent in that direction, but to be excluded by the others for such a reason would have been unbearable for him. He therefore tended to add something superfluous to the end of each story. However, You've all left out an essential point in the narrative. I refer to the professor's physical appearance.
It was the best he could do.
The description of physical appearance is extremely important in a work of fiction. By describing what a character looks like, you bring him alive and remind people of someone close to them, thereby lending intimacy to the tale and involving the audience, so that they cease to be mere passive observers. The way I see it, the elderly professor is a small man, 5 feet, 2 inches tall, and less than 110 pounds. As for his face, it is round with a high, broad, deeply furrowed forehead, thin eyebrows, a small nose, a wide, firm mouth, a white, bushy beard, and silver-rimmed spectacles. This was nothing less than a description of the eldest son's revered Ibsen. Such was the trivial nature of his powers of imagination. He appeared to have succeeded as usual in adding something that amounted to almost nothing. With this, at any rate, the story ended, and no sooner had it done so than boredom returned with a vengeance. The brothers and sisters all fell victim to the oppressive sense of bleakness that comes after a small bit of stimulation. An ugly mood hung over the room, stifling small talk. It was as if a single word from any of them might have resulted in blows. The mother, who'd sat apart from the others throughout, smiling dreamily as her 5 children revealed their characters one by one in the way they advanced the story, now got quietly to her feet and went to the paper screen door. She slid it open, then gasped and said, "Goodness! There's a strange old man in a frock coat standing at the gate staring in!" All 5 brothers and sisters jumped to their feet aghast. Their mother doubled over laughing. And that was Dazai's On Love and Beauty. I hope you enjoyed the reading. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for following me along on this journey. I can't wait to keep on making more art with you, and I can't wait to see what we learn and teach each other. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider doing so, liking, and leaving a comment. And I will see you on the next one.